The massive council chamber floated in the darkness between stars, and inside it the representatives of 100 worlds gathered for another routine meeting. Ambassador Kelrath of the Vryn stood up slowly, his 6 eyes scanning the room with worry. He had requested this emergency session 3 weeks ago, and most delegates seemed annoyed that he interrupted their regular schedule. The chamber itself was beautiful, with walls that showed the cosmos outside, and platforms that hovered at different heights for different species. Kelrath cleared his throat and began speaking. His voice translator turned his clicking sounds into words everyone could understand. He told them he came with a warning about a new species that had recently entered galactic space. The humans from a planet called Earth had been discovered only 5 years ago, and they were spreading fast across nearby star systems. Most delegates looked bored already because new species were discovered all the time, and most were primitive and harmless. Delegate Mora from the Silicate Worlds leaned forward and her crystal body caught the light. She asked why the Vryn were so concerned about one more primitive species. Kelrath's shell darkened with stress as he explained that humans were different and dangerous in ways the Council did not understand yet. High Chancellor Vorik from the Talon Empire actually laughed out loud and asked what threat could possibly come from a species that still used chemical rockets and had only just discovered faster than light travel. Kelrath activated the hologram display at the center of the chamber. Images appeared showing human workers in space near their asteroid belt. A human named Danny Carter was lifting a massive piece of refined metal that weighed 300 kilograms. The gravity was 0, but the structural pressure on his bones should have broken him. Yet Danny worked for 8 hours straight without stopping or complaining. Several delegates studied the images but seemed unimpressed. Many species had individuals with good strength and endurance. The Vryn ambassador changed the display to show a human colony on Mars. The red planet had weak gravity and freezing temperatures and almost no atmosphere. Most species would need heavy environmental suits and constant life support just to survive there. Yet humans walked around in basic suits and even had children playing in simple dome structures. Workers were building new facilities using old-fashioned tools and manual labor. What shocked Kelrath most was how fast they worked and how little they complained about the harsh conditions. He showed them footage of an accident that happened 2 months ago. A dome lost pressure suddenly and air started rushing out into space. A human engineer named Peter Hayes threw his body against the breach and used himself as a plug. The pressure difference should have torn him apart instantly. His bones should have shattered and his organs should have exploded. But Peter held on for nearly 2 minutes while others evacuated and emergency systems activated. After 3 days in medical care, he went back to work like nothing happened. When reporters asked him about it, Peter just shrugged and said anyone would do the same thing for their crew. Chancellor Vorik waved his hand dismissively and said one act of bravery meant nothing. Every species had heroes who did remarkable things under pressure. Kelrath expected this reaction, and he was ready with more evidence. He pulled up historical records from Earth's databases, which humans shared freely with anyone interested. What he found there terrified him enough to call this council meeting. Humans evolved on what the galaxy classified as a death world. The danger rating was 8.7 on a scale where anything above 6 was considered impossible for intelligent life to develop. The harshest world any council species came from was rated only 4.2. Earth had extreme weather that could kill in minutes, earthquakes that destroyed cities, volcanoes that blocked out the sun for years, and diseases that killed millions at a time. The planet was a nightmare, and somehow humans not only survived but thrived. The average human could survive 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food. They could adapt to high altitudes that would kill most species through oxygen deprivation. Their immune systems were so aggressive, they sometimes attacked their own bodies by mistake. Yet this same aggressive immune system made them almost impossible to infect with normal galactic diseases. Their bones were dense and hard to break. Their muscles could produce sudden explosive power or maintain steady effort for hours. Their healing factor was not regeneration, but it was impressive enough that they recovered from injuries that would cripple others permanently. Mora studied the biological data carefully and suggested that humans must be a prey species that evolved to run from predators. Kelrath told her she was wrong. Humans were persistence hunters. They did not outrun their prey with speed. They chased it for days without stopping until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. There were records of humans tracking prey across deserts and mountains and frozen wastelands. They simply never gave up. Then Kelrath showed them the truly frightening part of human history. Their entire recorded past was filled with wars. Not small border conflicts, but massive total wars where entire populations fought for survival or dominance. Ancient humans fought with bronze swords and spears. Medieval humans built castles and siege weapons. Industrial age humans created chemical weapons and machine guns. Modern humans developed nuclear weapons and used them. The council chamber went completely silent as mushroom clouds appeared in the hologram. These were actual recordings from Earth showing cities destroyed by atomic fire. Humans had built weapons that could crack their own planet and make it uninhabitable for thousands of years. They had used these weapons twice on their own cities, killing hundreds of thousands of their own species instantly. Then, instead of destroying themselves completely, they stepped back from the edge and chose a different path. Kelrath explained the concept of mutually assured destruction. It meant that any major war would end with everyone dead. Most species would become paralyzed by such fear and stop advancing entirely. Humans did the opposite. They channeled their competitive nature into technology and science and culture. They kept all the weapons as insurance but focused their energy on building rather than destroying. He showed them footage of the human ship called Endeavour. It was their first real interstellar vessel with only basic fusion engines and primitive computers. 3 years ago, this ship entered the Centauri system and hit an ancient minefield left over from a war that ended 10,000 years earlier. 17 antimatter mines exploded around the ship. The hull was torn open and radiation flooded the interior. The ship spun out of control toward the system's star. Captain Laura Bennett manually piloted the dying ship, using only small positioning thrusters. The bridge was exposed to vacuum. She had no pressure suit. She held her breath for nearly 4 minutes while her face turned purple, and blood vessels burst in her eyes. Her hands stayed steady on the controls as she brought the ship back under control and aimed it toward the nearest planet. She saved 43 crew members out of 50. When rescue ships arrived 6 days later, the humans had already started repairing their ship using scrap metal from the ancient battlefield. Kelrath let the images fade and looked at each delegate carefully. He told them he spent 3 years studying humanity. He reviewed their history in biology and psychology. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity was what happened when a prey species evolved in hell and decided to become a predator instead. They combined the survival instincts of prey with the aggression of apex predators and the intelligence to make tools and weapons. He stood before the council and made his plea. Do not provoke the humans. Do not threaten them. Do not give them reason to see the galaxy as an enemy, because if that happened, the council would learn too late that they woke up something that should have stayed sleeping. These humans did not know how to quit. They did not understand surrender. When backed into a corner, they came out fighting with everything they had. Chancellor Vorik leaned back and said the warning was noted and logged. However, he did not see how this primitive species could threaten civilizations that mastered quantum physics and dimensional technology. The Council had weapons that could destroy solar systems and defenses that bent space itself. What could humans possibly do against such power? Kelrath's response was quiet but firm. He reminded them that was exactly what the saber-toothed tigers thought before humans hunted them to extinction. That was what the Neanderthals believed before humans replaced them. That was what countless species on Earth assumed before humans took over the entire planet. Physical superiority meant nothing. Technological advantage meant nothing. Numbers meant nothing. In the end, humanity won because they refused to lose. He told them humanity's greatest weapon was not their bodies or machines. It was their minds. They were problem solvers who treated the word impossible as a challenge instead of a limitation. Give them an obstacle and they worked until they solved it. Back them into a corner and they fought with a fury that made no logical sense. They had a saying that necessity was the mother of invention. Every threat made them stronger. Delegate Mora said she appreciated the warning, but surely Kelrath was exaggerating the danger. Humans were confined to just a few star systems. It would take them centuries to become a real power. They were interesting, certainly, but not threatening. Kelrath pulled up one final chart showing human technological advancement over time. 300 years ago, they sailed wooden ships powered by wind. Today, they had fusion drives and were planning colonies in a dozen new systems. The rate of change was exponential. At their current pace, humans would match Council technology in just 2 generations. If they decided the Council was a threat, they would exceed it. This was not speculation but mathematical certainty based on observed patterns. Kelrath's voice was steady as he delivered his final warning. He hoped he was wrong. He truly hoped the council was right to dismiss his concerns. Because if they were wrong, they might not survive long enough to realize their mistake. The session ended with most delegates filing out and talking among themselves. A few looked thoughtful. Most looked skeptical. Chancellor Vorik officially entered the warning into council records and promised to establish monitoring protocols for human expansion. But his tone made clear he thought Kelrath was overreacting to a minor curiosity. As delegates left, Mora approached Kelrath privately. She asked if he truly believed humans were that dangerous. Kelrath looked at the fading hologram showing Captain Laura holding her breath in vacuum and saving her crew through pure willpower. He told Mora that humanity was the answer to an old question. What happens when a species absolutely refuses to die? The galaxy was about to find out, and he feared the answer would change everything. They knew about survival and intelligence and the nature of power itself. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair aboard the UES Pathfinder and watched the scan results appear on his screen. His crew had been exploring this sector for 6 months now, and most planets they found were either dead rocks or gas giants with nothing useful. This planet called Haven 4 looked different, though. The atmosphere had oxygen and nitrogen in the right mixture. There was liquid water on the surface, and the mineral scans showed rich deposits of rare elements that Earth needed badly. Lieutenant Amy Chen called out from her sensor station with excitement in her voice. She told the commander that something unusual was showing up on the northern continent. The readings indicated a large artificial structure, but the design did not match anything in their database. Jake sat up straighter and ordered her to put it on the main view screen. The image showed towers made of crystal that seemed to grow naturally from the ground. Energy pulses moved through the structure in steady, rhythmic patterns. Amy's voice got tight as she reported that the structure was actively using power. Someone was definitely home. Jake felt his heartbeat speed up because finding active alien installations was incredibly rare. Most species they encountered were long extinct or had abandoned their outposts millions of years ago. He ordered everyone to battle stations but told them to keep all weapons offline. This was first contact protocol and they needed to do it right. He called for Dr. Helen Stevens to get to the bridge immediately. Helen arrived 2 minutes later with her gray hair messy from running. She stared at the screen with pure wonder and said the architecture was beautiful. She guessed it was built by a crystalline-based species possibly made of silicon or carbon matrix structures. Jake asked if they could communicate with whoever was down there. Helen moved to the communications console and started broadcasting their standard first contact package. The message included mathematical sequences and chemical formulas and star charts showing Earth's location. These were supposed to be universal, languages that any technological species would recognize. For 5 long minutes nothing happened, and the crew started to wonder if maybe the structure was automated with no one actually inside. Then the crystal towers began glowing brighter. Amy reported an incoming transmission that matched their communication protocols exactly. Whoever was down there had figured out human technology in just minutes. The view screen changed to show an interior space filled with living crystal formations. A figure appeared that was roughly shaped like a human but made entirely of transparent, faceted segments that split light into rainbow colors. The being introduced herself as Scholar Jasara of the Silicate Collective. Her voice came through the translator as musical and feminine. She said they were the humans she had heard about. The ones from the Death World. Jake blinked in surprise and asked how she knew about humanity. Jasara told him that the galaxy already knew about humans. Their reputation had spread across multiple sectors. News traveled fast among spacefaring species, especially when it concerned potentially dangerous newcomers. Jake carefully explained that they were on a peaceful exploration mission. They were mapping this sector and looking for habitable worlds and resources. He said they did not know the planet was claimed and apologized if they had intruded on silicate territory. Jasara's crystalline form shifted in what might have been amusement. She told him the planet was not claimed. By galactic law, it was free for any species to settle. The silicates only maintained this small research station to study the unique mineral formations. She asked if humanity intended to claim this world. Jake thought about his answer carefully. Haven 4 would make an excellent colony site with good atmosphere and plenty of resources. But something in Jasara's tone made him cautious. He said they were here to explore and learn. Claiming territory was not their primary mission at this point. Jasara called it a diplomatic answer and asked if Jake knew why his species concerned the established civilizations of the galaxy. Jake admitted he had heard rumors that some species seemed nervous around humans, but he did not fully understand why. Jasara gestured and a holographic display appeared between them, showing human colonies on Mars and Europa and Saturn's moons. There were mining operations in the asteroid belt and a growing fleet of human spacecraft venturing deeper into space. Jasara explained that humans had been spacefaring for less than 1 century, yet they had already colonized environments that most species considered completely uninhabitable. They worked in conditions that would kill silicate people within hours. They endured radiation levels that should cause cellular breakdown, and they did all this with technology the galaxy considered primitive and outdated. Jake said humans were adaptable, and did not see what was so concerning about that. Jasara repeated the word adaptable slowly. She said yes, that was one word for it, but there were others. Relentless, stubborn, dangerous. The hologram changed to show footage Jake recognized immediately. It was the Endeavour incident with Captain Laura Bennett, holding her breath in vacuum while saving her ship. Jasara told him that Captain Bennett had become something of a legend among younger species. They saw her as a hero and a symbol of human courage and determination, but the older species saw something different. They saw a warning of what humanity was capable of when pushed to their limits. Jasara asked Jake if he knew how many species in the galaxy were classified as truly dangerous. Not just aggressive or territorial, but genuinely dangerous to galactic stability. Jake said he had no idea. Jasara told him that before humanity the count was 3. The Cathran and Melvari had destroyed each other 10,000 years ago. The Xanthrak were quarantined on their homeworld after trying to consume a populated planet. All 3 species shared certain traits, including extreme aggression and rapid reproduction and technological advancement that outpaced their social development. Humanity exhibited all these same traits, but humans also possessed something the others lacked, which was the ability to form deep bonds with other humans even outside their immediate genetic group. They called it empathy and compassion and love. This was humanity's saving grace and possibly the galaxy's as well. Jake felt a chill run down his spine and asked if the galaxy saw humans as potential threats. Jasara said some did and others saw humans as potential allies. The Vryn ambassador had tried to warn the Galactic Council about humanity 3 years ago, but most delegates dismissed his concerns. Jasara did not dismiss them. She requested this assignment specifically to meet humans and see for herself if the warnings were justified. Jake asked what she had concluded so far. Jasara was quiet for a moment before answering. She said Ambassador Kelrath was both right and wrong. Humanity was dangerous, and their capacity for violence and destruction was evident throughout their history. But they were also capable of remarkable kindness and self-sacrifice. Humans were a paradox, a species of warriors who dreamed of peace, hunters who protected the weak, survivors who risked everything for others. She gestured at the planet below and said Jake could legally claim this world if he wanted to. But she sensed he would not. Jake glanced at Helen, who gave him a subtle nod. He told Jasara they would not claim Haven 4. If silicate researchers were studying the world, then humans would find another planet. There were plenty of options out there. Jasara said that was exactly what she expected him to say. This was why she believed humanity might yet surprise the galaxy. Humans had strength but chose restraint. They had power but sought cooperation. These were rare traits among spacefaring species. Helen spoke up and asked why no one had directly communicated with Earth about these concerns. Why all the secrecy and observation from a distance? Jasara explained that the galaxy was afraid, not of what humanity was now, but of what they might become. Humans were children playing with fire, completely unaware they held the power to burn down the entire forest. The established civilizations were debating how to handle humanity. Some wanted to share technology and accelerate human development, to integrate them into galactic society. Others wanted to contain humans and limit their expansion until they proved themselves ready for the larger universe. Jake asked what Jasara personally wanted. She said she wanted what was best for all species, including humanity. She wanted humans to understand the responsibility that came with power. She wanted them to learn from the mistakes of those who came before. And most of all, she wanted to prevent the catastrophe that would occur if humanity was provoked into a war they were not ready for. Jake insisted that humans were explorers, not conquerors. Jasara asked what would happen when a human colony was attacked. What would happen when human people were killed by a species that saw them as primitives? What would happen when humanity's patience finally ran out? The question hung in the air between them, and Jake had no good answer because he knew Jasara was right. Humanity had been lucky so far. They had found abandoned ruins and isolated researchers like Jasara. But sooner or later they would meet someone hostile, someone who saw human expansion as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Jake said he could not speak for all of humanity, but he could say that humans did not want war. They had fought enough wars among themselves on Earth. They came to space hoping to find something better and to be part of something larger than themselves. Jasara said those were noble words, and she hoped humans could live up to them. She made Jake an offer. Stay for a few days and let her show them what the silicates had learned about this world. They could exchange knowledge and culture. She would help Jake understand the galaxy humans were entering with all its wonders and dangers. Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. They were scientists and explorers who were hungry for exactly this kind of opportunity. He accepted Jasara's offer and thanked her for the chance. Over the next 3 days, the crew of the Pathfinder learned more about galactic civilization than they had discovered in 3 years of solo exploration. Jasara was patient and thorough. She explained the complex web of alliances and treaties and rivalries that shaped galactic politics. She showed them star maps marking territories of hundreds of species, each with unique histories and cultures. But she also showed them the dark history, the wars that consumed entire civilizations, the genocides carried out for racial purity or religious fervor, the mistakes that cost billions of lives across countless worlds. Jasara told Jake on the final evening as they stood watching the alien sunset that the galaxy had learned many hard lessons. The most important lesson was that power without wisdom led to catastrophe. Technology without morality led to genocide. Strength without compassion created monsters. Jake said humanity knew these lessons already, because they had made all these mistakes themselves on Earth. Jasara agreed, but pointed out that humans had only made these mistakes on a planetary scale. They had not yet made them on a galactic scale. The question was whether humanity could learn from their past before repeating it on a much larger and deadlier stage. Jake asked why Jasara was really helping them and what she gained from teaching humans about the galaxy. Jasara's crystalline form caught the sunset light and created dancing patterns across the observation dome. She said she was helping because she believed in second chances. Her own species nearly destroyed itself in a civil war thousands of years ago. The silicates survived only because other species intervened and taught them a better way. She hoped to pay that debt forward by giving humanity the same chance her people received. She was giving humans the truth. The galaxy was not a welcoming place. It was vast and beautiful and terrible. Species rose and fell like waves on an ocean. Civilizations that seemed eternal crumbled into dust. Through it all, the strong survived by being wise enough to avoid unnecessary conflicts. The next morning, the Pathfinder prepared to leave. Jake stood on the bridge watching Jasara's facility grow smaller on the view screen. He ordered Amy to set course for Earth and transmit everything they learned to Fleet Command, with Priority 1 classification. As the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Jake could not shake the feeling that their meeting with Jasara had been a major turning point. Humanity had been operating in the dark, but now their eyes were opened. With that knowledge came responsibility. Amy asked quietly if Jake thought Jasara was right about humanity being dangerous. Jake thought about human history with all its wars and atrocities. But he also thought about the heroes and peacemakers and countless people who risked everything to save others. He told Amy that humans had capacity for danger but also capacity for greatness. The real question was which one they would choose when it mattered most. Admiral Victor Kane stood in the Situation Room at Fleet Command and stared at the holographic display with his jaw clenched tight. Around him, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and civilian leadership waited in tense silence. Nobody wanted to speak first because they all knew what they were about to watch would change everything. Kane's voice was quiet and hard when he ordered them to show the footage again. The hologram displayed the colony on New Terra, showing normal daily life. Human settlers were farming and building. Children played in parks under the domed sections. Construction crews worked on expanding the habitation zones. Then the sky went dark as massive alien ships appeared in orbit without any warning. The attack was surgical and brutal. Kinetic strikes from orbit hit the power plants first. Then they destroyed water treatment facilities and communication arrays. Within 3 minutes, the colony was completely crippled and helpless. But the alien ships did not leave after disabling the infrastructure. They descended through the atmosphere and ground forces poured out. The aliens were insectoid with hard chitinous armor and weapons that fired superheated plasma. They had not come to negotiate or demand surrender. They came to exterminate every human on New Terra. The footage showed colonists fighting back with whatever they could grab. Mining equipment became weapons. Personal firearms were pulled from storage. Tools were used to attack the invaders. The colonists held out for 3 desperate days before rescue ships finally arrived. By then, 2,000 people were dead and 5,000 more were wounded. The alien force withdrew before the human fleet could engage them and jumped to faster-than-light travel. Kane's voice was like gravel when he identified the attackers as the Krell Empire. Linguistic analysis of their transmissions had revealed their identity. They attacked without warning and without provocation and without mercy. President Linda Morrison leaned forward and asked if anyone knew why the Krell did this. Kane pulled up a transmission that arrived after the attack. An insectoid face filled the screen with compound eyes that glittered with what looked like contempt. The Krell ambassador's voice hissed through the translator. He announced that humans had expanded into space claimed by the Krell Empire. Human presence in this sector violated ancient territorial rights. The attack was a warning. Humanity must withdraw to their home system or face total annihilation. The transmission ended abruptly. President Morrison looked around the room and asked if the Krell had any legitimate claim to New Terra. Foreign Minister George Harris shook his head firmly. According to every galactic database humans had accessed, this sector was unclaimed space. The Krell Empire had no legal basis for their actions. This was naked aggression, plain and simple. Morrison said they had to respond. Kane interrupted and told the president she needed to understand what they were dealing with first. The Krell Empire was one of the major powers in this region of space. They controlled over 200 star systems. Their fleet numbered in the thousands of warships. Ground forces were estimated at over 50 billion soldiers. Morrison asked about human forces. Kane's answer was grim. 37 warships total, 15 million personnel across all military branches. They were massively outgunned. The room fell into heavy silence. The numbers were devastating. Humanity had been in space for less than a century. They focused on exploration and colonization, not military buildup. Now they faced a war they could not possibly win through conventional means. Morrison asked what their allies were saying. Harris grimaced and explained that was part of the problem. Humanity did not really have allies. They had trading partners and species that tolerated their presence but no formal defense treaties. He reached out to scholar Jacera, who expressed sympathy, but said the Silicate Collective could not intervene. They were researchers, not warriors. Morrison asked about the Galactic Council. Harris said he submitted a formal complaint 3 days ago and received a response that morning. The council acknowledged the attack occurred. They noted that the Krell Empire was a council member in good standing. They suggested humanity and the Krell Empire engage in mediated negotiations to resolve this territorial dispute. Morrison's voice rose in anger when she repeated the words territorial dispute. They murdered 2,000 civilians and the council called it a territorial dispute. Harris explained that the council operated on principles humans were still learning. From their perspective, this was a minor border conflict between 2 species. The fact that one species was barely spacefaring was irrelevant to them. Kane cleared his throat and said there was something else they needed to know. Analysis of the Krell attack patterns and weapon signatures showed they were holding back. Morrison asked what he meant by holding back. Kane explained that Krell ships were equipped with antimatter weapons capable of cracking a planet's crust. They did not use them. Their ground forces had access to chemical and biological weapons. They did not use those either. This was not an extermination attempt. It was a test. Morrison asked what they were testing. Kane said they wanted to measure human resolve and capabilities and willingness to fight. The Krell wanted to see how humanity would respond to aggression. Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking Geneva, where Fleet Command was established. She authorized Kane to deploy the fleet to defend human colonies. Rules of engagement were defense only, but if the Krell attacked again, humans would hit back hard. Kane carefully pointed out that if they engaged the Krell fleet directly, they would lose. The math was simple and brutal. Morrison said she understood, but they could not allow attacks on their people without consequence. If they showed weakness now, every species in the galaxy would see humans as prey. They needed to make it clear that attacking humanity had a cost even if they could not win the overall war. Kane nodded slowly and said he would deploy the fleet immediately. But he needed authorization for contingency plans. Things they had been developing in case humanity faced an existential threat. Morrison turned from the window and asked what kind of contingency plans. Kane said the kind that would ensure the Krell Empire understood that even if they defeated humanity, the price would be devastating. The kind that would make them wish they never heard of humans. Morrison's eyes narrowed and she told him to elaborate. Kane pulled up a classified file and the room's security systems activated. The chamber was sealed and all electronic surveillance was scrambled. He showed them Project Prometheus. Humans had been developing weapons based on human ingenuity, rather than copied alien technology. Things that played to human strengths like improvisation and asymmetric warfare and pure stubbornness. The hologram showed various weapon designs. Kinetic kill vehicles using human-developed fusion drives, swarm missiles operating on basic AI principles humanity mastered decades ago, and something Kane called Darwin bombs. Morrison asked what Darwin bombs were. Kane explained they were named after Charles Darwin, who founded evolutionary theory. They were biological weapons, but not conventional ones. They were tailored viruses designed to attack specific genetic markers. Humans had been analyzing every alien species they encountered and mapping their genomes. If humanity faced extinction, they could ensure their enemies faced it too. Morrison's face went pale and she said that was monstrous. Kane agreed it was, but pointed out it was also deterrence. If the Krell knew that attacking humanity meant they would be wiped out by an incurable plague, they might think twice. Morrison said firmly that humans would never actually use such weapons. Kane agreed, but noted the Krell did not need to know that. The threat alone might be enough to keep them cautious. Harris spoke up and said there was a problem with that strategy. If humans threatened genocide, they would turn every species in the galaxy against them. They would validate every fear Ambassador Kelrath expressed to the Council 3 years ago. Kane replied that they would not threaten openly. They would let information leak through intelligence channels. Let the Krell discover human capabilities on their own. Make them understand that while they might defeat humanity, they would not survive the victory. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. She said she hated everything about this. It went against what humanity was trying to build in space. Humans came to find their place among the stars, not to become the monsters others feared. Kane said he understood, but sometimes the only way to prevent war was to make the cost too high for anyone to start one. The Krell were testing humanity. They needed to pass that test or face threat after threat, until someone finally destroyed them. Morrison nodded slowly and told Kane to proceed with deploying the fleet. She authorized initiating Project Prometheus, but only as deterrence. She wanted multiple authorization levels required for actual deployment, and she told Kane to find another option. Find a way to end this without becoming the thing they feared. As the meeting ended, Kane remained behind studying the tactical displays. He spent his entire career preparing for war, but never like this. Never against an enemy so vastly superior in numbers and technology. Never with so much at stake. 6 months after the Battle of New Terra, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session, and the atmosphere was very different from 3 years earlier when Ambassador Kelrath delivered his warning. Then the chamber was filled with dismissive laughter. Now it was tense with barely controlled fear. Kelrath stood at the center of the chamber, but he was not alone this time. Beside him stood President Linda Morrison, who became the first human to address the Galactic Council. Kelrath began by reminding the delegates that 3 years ago he stood in this chamber and warned them about humanity. Most dismissed his concerns. Today they gathered to discuss the consequences of that dismissal. High Chancellor Vorik of the Talon Empire shifted uncomfortably on his platform. He said the council acknowledged that the situation with humanity had become more complex than initially anticipated. However, the Krell attack was an isolated incident. Kelrath interrupted and said it was not isolated. He activated a holographic display showing a timeline of the last 6 months. 17 separate incidents showed species attempting to intimidate or attack human colonies. Most ended similarly to the Krell encounter, with human forces fighting desperately against overwhelming odds until other species intervened or attackers withdrew. Kelrath continued and said humanity had been in open space for less than a century, yet they fought more defensive wars in 6 months than most species fought in a millennium. And they won. not through superior technology but through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. President Morrison stepped forward. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held a hardness that made even ancient species uncomfortable. She said she did not come seeking approval or pity. She came to deliver a message. Morrison activated her own display showing footage from various battles humanity fought. Ships burning in space, ground forces locked in brutal combat, human soldiers fighting hand-to-hand when weapons failed. Everywhere the same pattern appeared, with humans refusing to surrender and refusing to yield and fighting until victory or death. Morrison said coldly that this was what the Council created. When they dismissed Kelrath's warnings, and when they allowed the Krell to attack without consequence, and when they stood by watching species after species test humanity's resolve, they created this. They wanted to know if humans were dangerous. Congratulations, because now they knew. Delegate Mora of the Silicate Confederation spoke up. She said no one here condoned attacks on human people. They intervened at New Terra. Morrison cut her off and said the intervention came after 2,000 of her people were dead. They intervened after humans already proved they would fight. She asked Mora directly if the Silicates would have come if humans surrendered. If humans had run away, Mora's crystalline form dimmed and she could not answer. Morrison turned to address the entire chamber. She said she studied their history since coming here. She knew about the Cathran and the Melvari. She knew about the Zenthrak. She knew they had protocols for dealing with dangerous species, including containment and quarantine, and even preemptive military action, so she would save them the trouble of debating. Morrison pulled up another display showing human military capabilities, not just ships and weapons that fought at New Terra, but projects kept hidden until now. Project Prometheus, Darwin bombs, kinetic kill weapons that could crack planets, automated defense systems ensuring any attack on Earth would be met with total retaliation. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several delegates began speaking at once, and their translators created a cacophony of alarm. High Chancellor Vorik commanded silence. When order was restored, he turned to Morrison and asked if she dared threaten the Council with weapons of mass destruction. Morrison replied calmly that she was not threatening anyone. She was being honest. They wanted to know if humanity was dangerous. Yes, they were. Humans had capacity to destroy civilizations. They had weapons that could render entire planets uninhabitable. They developed these things not because they wanted to, but because the galaxy taught them that only the strong survived. Morrison paused and let her words sink in. But here was what they needed to understand about humanity. Humans did not want to use these weapons. They created them as insurance and as deterrence. They would rather build than destroy. They would rather explore than conquer. Humans came to space with hope and wonder, and the galaxy nearly beat that out of them. Ambassador Kelrath clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. He said Morrison spoke truth, and he believed she was here for more than just honesty. She was here to offer them a choice. Morrison nodded and said Kelrath was correct. She was offering the Council a choice, and by extension offering every species in the galaxy a choice. They could continue seeing humanity as a threat to be contained or eliminated. They could continue testing humans and provoking them and seeing how far they could push before humans broke. But if they chose that path, Morrison promised them that humans would not break. They would fight, and the galaxy would burn. She changed the display to show human colonies with farms and factories, schools and hospitals, children playing in parks under alien skies, scientists conducting research, artists creating works of beauty, engineers building wonders. Morrison said they could choose a different path instead. They could see humanity for what they really were, which was a young species trying to find their place in the universe. They could work with humans instead of against them. They could share knowledge and learn from human perspective. They could help humans become better, and in return humans would help protect and build the galactic civilization they created. The chamber was silent now, with every delegate focused on Morrison's words. She said 3 years ago Kelrath warned them not to provoke humans. That warning went unheeded, and the result was conflict and death. Today she gave them a different warning, which was not to force humans to become the monsters they feared. Because if they did, the galaxy would not survive the encounter. Not because humans were stronger, but because they were too stubborn to die quietly. High Chancellor Vorik leaned forward and asked if they chose cooperation, what would humanity offer in return? Morrison said simply everything they had. Their innovation and determination and different perspective on problems, the galaxy struggled with for millennia. Humans were young and reckless, absolutely, but they were also creative and adaptable. They solved problems in ways others had not considered because they did not know what was supposed to be impossible. She gestured to human ships visible through the chamber's transparent walls. Human technology was primitive by galactic standards, but it was effective. They achieved with chemical rockets and fusion drives what others achieved with quantum tunneling and dimensional drives. Imagine what humans could accomplish with access to galactic knowledge. Imagine what they could build together. Scholar Jasara spoke up and said she witnessed humanity's capacity for both violence and compassion. She believed humans could be valuable allies. But many here feared that given advanced technology, humanity would become unstoppable, that they would conquer rather than cooperate. Morrison acknowledged that fear was not unfounded. Humans had a history of conquest on their own world. They fought wars over resources and territory and ideology. They did terrible things to each other. She could not promise humanity would never engage in conflict again. They were not saints and not perfect. But Morrison promised they learned from mistakes. They evolved beyond their history of genocide and total war. They built a united planetary government that valued cooperation over conquest. And, most importantly, they understood the consequences of unchecked aggression because they lived through them. Morrison turned back to the full council. She said they were afraid of what humanity might become. She understood that, but she asked them to consider what humans would become if forced to fight for survival. If they isolated humans and threatened them, and taught them the only way to be safe was to be strongest, then yes, humans would become the monsters they feared. Not because it was their nature, but because the galaxy would give them no other choice. Kelrath clicked his mandibles in approval. He said Morrison offered wisdom, and they could shape humanity's future through choices made today. They could integrate humans into galactic society, tempering their aggression with experience. Or they could drive them to desperation, creating the very threat they sought to prevent. A new voice declared that the Vryn ambassador spoke from fear. A delegate Morrison had not seen before rose from a platform shrouded in shadow. The translator identified him as Representative Korax of the Hive Collective, known for militant expansion. Korax said humanity already demonstrated its threat. They developed weapons of mass destruction within months of encountering hostile species. They fought battles they should have lost. They refused to accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. The galaxy should contain them now before they grew stronger. Morrison's voice dropped to dangerous quiet. She told Korax to understand something very clearly. Humanity survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and nuclear weapons. They survived predators that could tear them apart, and diseases that killed millions and their own capacity for self-destruction. Humans were survivors and they did not submit easily. She pulled up footage from Earth's history, showing battles fought against impossible odds and civilizations, rising from ashes and humanity's long climb from primitive tool users to spacefaring civilization. Morrison said Korax saw weakness because humans were young. She saw strength because they were still here despite everything that tried to kill them. He wanted to contain humans and was welcome to try. But understand that the cage built would either hold a friend or trap an enemy. Choose wisely. The chamber erupted into debate. Some species supported integration, while others wanted containment, and still others advocated for more aggressive measures. The argument raged for hours with Morrison standing calmly at the center and waiting. Finally, Vorik called for order. The council would vote on humanity's status in galactic society. 3 proposals were presented which were full integration, with technology sharing or limited integration with restricted access or quarantine to human-controlled space with military observation. Morrison interjected before they voted and said she had one more thing to show them. She activated a final display showing human scientists working alongside silicate researchers, human engineers collaborating with Vryn technicians, human doctors treating alien patients, cultural exchanges and art exhibitions and academic conferences. Morrison said this was what humans had been doing while the council debated their fate. Species willing to work with humans found they were not monsters. They were colleagues and friends and neighbors. Humans shared knowledge freely. They helped solve problems. They contributed to communities they joined. Morrison smiled slightly and said the council spent 3 years wondering if humans were dangerous. They should have been asking if humans were useful, because they were very useful, and they would rather be useful allies than dangerous enemies. The vote was close, but ultimately the Council chose limited integration. Humanity would be granted access to certain technologies and trade networks, but with restrictions on military expansion and weapons development. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but prevented outright conflict. As the session ended and delegates filed out, Jacera approached Morrison. She said Morrison played them well with threat of violence, balanced with promise of cooperation. Very human. Morrison sighed and said she meant every word. Humans did not want war but would fight if necessary. She hoped they understood that. Jacera said some did and some did not, but Morrison bought humanity time to prove themselves. Use it wisely, Morrison said they would. She looked at assembled ships of 100 species, each representing civilizations older and more advanced than humanity. She asked Jacera why she really helped humans at New Terra. The silicate scholar's crystalline form shimmered thoughtfully. She said she saw in humanity what her own species once was, which was young and aggressive and frightened and desperately wanting to be more. Silicates had helped becoming who they were today. She thought humans deserved the same chance. Morrison asked if Jacera thought humans would take it or become the threat everyone feared. Jacera said humanity would surprise everyone, including themselves. They had darkness with capacity for terrible violence, but they also had light with compassion and creativity and hope. The question was which side they nurtured. Morrison nodded slowly and said they would nurture the light, but they would keep the darkness ready just in case, because that was what survivors did. The galaxy had implored itself not to provoke humans, but warnings came too late. Now the truth was unveiled and humanity stood at a crossroads ready to become either conquerors or cooperators. The choice was theirs, shaped by how they were treated and how they chose to respond. His communicator buzzed with a call from Captain Frank Butler, who commanded the UES Defiant. Butler said they completed the jump to New Terra, and Kane needed to see something immediately. The hologram shifted to show the view from the Defiant's bridge. New Terra hung in space with its surface scarred by the Krell attack. But that was not what made Kane's blood run cold. The Krell fleet had returned. 50 warships hung in orbit with weapons locked on the planet below. They were not attacking yet, just waiting. Butler said grimly that they were daring humans to engage. They wanted to see what humanity was made of. Kane studied the display showing 50 Krell warships versus the 7 human ships that arrived with the Defiant. The odds were roughly 7-1, which was completely hopeless by any rational assessment. But humans had never been rational about defending their own people. Kane spoke quietly and told Butler to relay a message to the Krell fleet. They had attacked human civilians without provocation. They violated the laws of war recognized by all civilized species. Withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences. Butler pointed out that the Krell outgunned them 7-1. Kane said he was aware of that and told him to send the message anyway. A moment later, a response came back. The Krell ambassador's face appeared on screen with his mandibles clicking in what might have been laughter. He asked if humans dared threaten the Krell Empire. Humans were children playing with weapons they did not understand. Withdraw or the Krell would teach them the price of defiance. Kane felt a cold calm settle over him. This was the moment. This was where humanity would either prove themselves or be revealed as the weak primitive species the galaxy believed them to be. Kane gave the order. All ships were weapons-free. Engage the Krell fleet. Show them what happens when you provoke humans. The battle for New Terra had begun and the galaxy was watching.